AEW's final pay-per-view of 2024 is in the books, World's End, where we saw some thrilling conclusions to the Continental Classic and not really a whole heck of a lot else. A pretty lackluster card as a whole that got off to a really hot start and had a potential match of the year contender on it. What we're going to do is we're going to go through match by match. I'm going to give my overall thoughts on it, as well as finishing with a rating out of 5 stars. If you like the video, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or leaving a like, as it does help a new channel like myself to grow. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into it with our first match. So starting off the card, we had a semi-final match in the Continental Classic. The winner of the Blue League, Kyle Fletcher, going up against the runner-up of the Gold League in Will Ospreay. And shocker of all shockers, these two had a freaking phenomenal match together. If you've seen any of their previous matches they've had this year, it's much the same quality. Just superb action throughout, beautiful counters, beautiful offense throughout. Really, really great stuff. And I feel like they did a good job about giving this match a uniqueness that their other 2 matches didn't. Kyle in this match, more so than the previous match at Full Gear, really made himself seem like a bully, like a street tough more than anything. And that was accomplished by opening up Will early and Will just bleeding buckets in this match. And Kyle really taking advantage of that and really making himself seem like this jerk heel who everyone wants to just hate. He really did a good job about expressing that character in this match, probably better than I have since his initial heel turn. And Will, for his part, did a great job as well. The bleeding in wrestling can sometimes be a little bit gratuitous, and it can sort of just be like, oh, they're doing a little bit of blood in this match to get a little bit of color. And we'll talk about an example of that later down the card. But in this match, it really enhanced the action. This was an example of a match that really benefited from the copious amounts of blood coming off of Will. And it benefited the match that he had later down the card as well. Overall, the action was great, and it did a really good job about calling back to their previous matches while also introducing new and exciting spots to make this match unique and different. One criticism I will give of this match, though, that wasn't really present in their other matches, is that when it was Will's time to make the hot comeback and do that sort of babyface fire-up spot, he sort of just did all of his normal moves. And he didn't really differentiate his arsenal as a result of being worked over so heavily. Like, he had lost a lot of blood by this point, but when he made his comeback, he just did a springboard and did a twisty kick and did a forearm and did a Styles Clash. But none of it really made sense within the context of the match. Like, he wasn't slower than he normally is. He wasn't a little bit off base. It just seemed like Will went, oh, now's the time for me to do my comeback, so I'm just going to hit all the moves I normally hit in a match. It just, the fire-up spots were sort of disconnected from the rest of the match and from everything else that was happening. And granted, the offense did make the match very exciting and did a great job about pulling the crowd into it. It's just logically didn't really make sense and sort of pulled me out of the match as a result. And this was the first of 2 matches in the night for Ospreay, because he did beat Fletcher and then go on to the finals. So this match didn't really have the standard Ospreay crescendo that we've come to expect. And what I mean by that is this match felt like it needed another 5 minutes to truly be another 5-star classic from Will Ospreay, but we didn't get that. It sort of had to be shorter and stunted because he was saving a lot for later down the card. And while I don't necessarily discredit the match for having that, I get why it was. It sort of did leave me feeling a little flat at the end. But having said that, I completely understand why they did it. You need to save some stuff in the tank for when he faces, spoiler alert, when he faces Okada later down the line. So it really was the perfect match for the story they were telling on this night and for this tournament. So overall, great action, a great story told, really good job about characterizing both guys, and a really effective job about setting up the finals later. The only criticism I have to give is that Ospreay's comeback spots really didn't make a whole lot of sense and sort of took me out. But having said all that, an absolute phenomenal match. Definitely go out of your way to watch it. 4 3/4 out of 5 stars. Next up was our other semifinal match in the Continental Classic. It was the winner of the Gold League, Ricochet, taking on the runner-up in the Blue League, Kazuchika Okada. And this was once again a really, really great match. This was definitely my favorite Ricochet match in AEW this far. I think this far supersedes anything else he did. And excluding the match he had with Pac earlier this year and the match he had with Danielson last year at Forbidden Door, this is probably the best Kazuchika Okada match in AEW as well. The thing that I really loved about this match is it was able to carry on the tone set forth by the previous match. Those two matches combined at the start of the pay-per-view really did a good job about telling the audience this pay-per-view is all about the Continental Classic. You're getting the best stories, the best work rate, so be tuned in for the finals. And boy, were they, because they really came up for the final match. I feel like this match really was the best demonstration of Ricochet's new character that he's had since he slowly started turning heel. And it did that by differentiating him between other wrestlers. Firstly, he was different from Kazuchika Okada, who was sort of the stoic, situational babyface. So Ricochet, being this sort of braggadocious geek, was really offset by Okada's character and did a really good job about showing Ricochet thinks he's the tough guy, but Okada's actually the tough guy, and now Ricochet has to reckon with that. It also did a good job about differentiating him from Kyle Fletcher in the previous match, where Kyle is like this back alley street tough who, if you see him in a bar, he's gonna get in a fight with someone, he's gonna go to jail. Ricochet is more just this goober in the classroom who thinks he's tough and can pick on all the smaller kids, but once he sees an actual big kid, he's in trouble. I think they did such a great job about establishing that dynamic in the match, but not in a way that made Ricochet look like a loser. He still held a lot of the offense, and he still was able to seem on the level of Okada, if not just a little bit below. And this match, similarly to the last one, was great while also still leaving something on the table for Okada to move on to later in the night. I feel like it did a really good job about following the last match, where it could have really paled in comparison based on the great action and story we got from Ospreay and Fletcher. And this match didn't live up to that match, but it still did a good job about holding up on its own, because it differentiated itself enough from the ultra violence last time to a more pro wrestling charisma, crowd interaction based storyline. And I feel like that little small tweak really did this match a lot of good. So, a really great match. One I would recommend you go out of your way to see, but not quite as good as the last match. So, it falls one tick below that with 4.5 out of 5 stars. And from here, this show sort of fell off quality-wise, and it wouldn't really pick itself back up again until the finals of the Continental Classic. But next, we got Mariah May defending the AEW Women's Championship against Thunder Rosa in a Tijuana street fight. And really, this was a pretty standard plunder brawl, and if you've watched my reviews in the past, you probably know I am just not a fan of these generic plunder brawls for the sake of getting a plunder brawl or a ladder match onto a pay-per-view card. I never think they're very good. I never think they're interesting. You can't really tell unique stories in them, and that was really precedent in this match. There was no real character to this match, nothing to make it different from anything else, other than the fact that I feel like it wasn't wrestled very good. It feels like everything was done at about 75% what it should have been. The chair shots were weak. A lot of the strikes were pretty weak. Throwing people through basically it was like a cardboard display in front of the entrance. It just didn't look good. Nothing really looked as effective as it should be, and you couldn't really take it seriously as a street fight as a result. it just always felt too cooperative. You could always see the strings throughout the match. You could always tell what spot they were building to next and when they were going to those spots. You could see them working together rather than it genuinely feeling like a struggle, like a real fight, which is the energy that matches like this thrive on, when you can believe these two people are trying to kill each other. And other than a few fun spots like the pinata that Thunder Rosa brought down being full of thumbtacks and the pile driver through the table at the end, there wasn't really a whole lot to enjoy in this match. It was just, now they're hitting each other with a trash can and it doesn't look very good. Now they're hitting each other with a table and it just doesn't look very good. So overall, I thought there were some fun spots in it, but also some spots that looked really bad. I just gave it 3 stars. I thought it was a fine enough street fight, but nothing really new or innovative to make it worth remembering or going back and watching again. Next up, we had MJF taking on Adam Cole, and it's really crazy how much these two guys have had their stock fall as a result of being in this feud. An awful feud that doesn't really make any sense. One of the worst things on AEW this year. And when they're making their entrances, it just doesn't feel like they're stars anymore. And it's MJF and Adam Cole, two of the biggest stars in the company. And when they were making their entrance, I was sort of just like, oh yeah, I forgot this match was on the card. I wasn't excited to see them, and I didn't necessarily think I was going to get a great match, which, based on their previous encounters and just based on them being great wrestlers, you should expect. So I feel like right out the gate, the story really detracted from this match. But having said that, I feel like this match did over deliver on the story we were given. An awful storyline followed up by a pretty good match. I wouldn't go so far as calling it great, but I would call it pretty good. Definitely nowhere near their previous 2 encounters from the last year. But it was fun, as it always is, to see MJF wrestling on pay-per-view, just being able to interact with the crowd, yelling at people, flipping people off, snatching signs from people, just really a lot of fun to be had. And Adam Cole played his part well in here. I think this is probably the best that Adam has looked since his return from injury. I liked the Malachi Black match more than a lot of other people, but that did get heavily dumped on. And I do feel like this was a better performance from him than anything we've seen on Dynamite since his return. And I thought the match had a pretty cool ending where MJF sort of did an Eddie Guerrero spot where he slammed his hands down the steel steps and made the ref think the Kingdom had thrown him into it, where he could then go grab the golden, not the golden ring, the beautiful diamond ring. How could I forget that? And went in to try to hit Adam Cole with it, and then they did some more reversals before MJF won with the Heat Seeker. I thought it was a good ending, and one of the examples where overbooking really did the match a good service rather than just sort of hindering from it, because honestly, the action up to that point was always good, but pretty standard. And this was the match I was talking about earlier when I said bleeding for bleeding's sake, because Cole got opened early up after a shot from the steel steps, and then MJF afterwards also got opened up, and I was like, why are we doing this? Does this story really call for blood? And overall, that sort of encapsulates my thoughts on the match. They were trying to encompass something that they just simply couldn't. They were trying to call back to the great matches they've had in the past, but the story has diluted fan interest so much that that could never really happen. So the bleeding, the overbooking, just sort of spamming finishers at the end, it had the makeup of a great match, but without any of the heart or any of the soul in it. And really, it felt like they were trying to overcome the bad booking that had got them to where they are. They were trying to be better than the story that had led in and make people forget about all that nonsense that had happened in the past. And they didn't quite get there. They were just a little bit behind the mark on that, where they had a very good match, but not really one that could make me invested in either character again. And I'm not saying I'll never be invested in either character. They're both two phenomenal wrestlers who could easily get me going on another storyline, so long as it makes sense. And this storyline just did not make sense. The crowd wasn't very into it. I wasn't very into it as a result. They had a hard time getting us back into the action, and they almost got there. They almost had a great match, but they just fell a little short of the mark. So I gave it 3 3/4 out of 5 stars. Next up, Konosuke Takeshita defended his international title against Powerhouse Hobbs in a pretty standard match, something that was well worked, but just not very exciting. This was the second match in a row where someone worked a leg or knee injury, which is like booking 101. Make sure that doesn't happen. Agenting 101. Make sure that 2 matches in a row don't do the exact same thing. And this match was sort of a little bit boring as a result. There were large periods when Takeshita was working over Hobbs's leg when I was actively disengaged, wanting to go on my phone, just not caring about what was presented in front of me. And it was all technically very good, and they hit the moves in the order they were supposed to, and they did everything, and it looked good. But similarly to the last match, it just didn't have any heart. I didn't really care about the story. I haven't really had either of these people presented as main event concerns for me, even though I like them both very much. So I just could never really engage with the action as a result. This match would have been so much better if it was just an out and out brawl where they probably cut 3 minutes off the match and they just beat the tar out of each other the whole time. No starting off slow, working over a limb to have Hobbs do the big babyface comeback. Just going at each other for like 7 to 10 minutes, hitting big bombs, big power moves, doing the what's the thing? The big meaty men slapping meat kind of match. That's what they should have done here, because it would have been different from everything else on the card and really serviced both characters better. But as it was just sort of bland. And it didn't help that commentary at the beginning of the match said that Shingo Takagi was going to be challenging Konosuke Takeshita at Wrestle Kingdom for the international champion. That they just gave away the ending. They told you Powerhouse Hobbs wasn't going to win because Takeshita already had a future match lined up. And they've been doing this a bunch on AEW TV. They did it with the Mariah May leading up to facing Thunder Rosa. She was having another mini program with someone, and they just were like, yeah, this doesn't really matter because Thunder Rosa is where we're going eventually. And even the Thunder Rosa match, Mariah is going to face Toni Storm down the line. So it's just completely inconsequential as a result. And this happens later in the night as well with Mercedes Mone versus Kris Statlander. So this match, you could never buy into it because you never thought Hobbs was going to win. It was just impossible to get into that mindset because they told you at the beginning he was not going to win. Absolutely insane thing for AEW to do. Completely dissolved my interest in this match as a result. Technically well worked. The crowd seemed super into it. I'm sure there were people who were into this. I just wasn't. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. And next up was Mercedes Mone versus Kris Statlander, another match that they completely gave away the ending to before it even started because they said Mercedes was going to be facing Mina Shirakawa at Wrestle Dream. So, or whatever it's called, Wrestling Dynasty. Whatever, the New Japan pay-per-view with AEW and CMLL. So, really hard to get invested, but actually I think it worked to this match's credit a little bit more because I was really sure Kris Statlander was going to win the title in this match, because why would they have booked a rematch if not for Kris Statlander to win? It's the same question I was asking when Adam Page and Jay White had their rematch at Full Gear a little bit earlier this year. It doesn't really make sense for them to have a rematch unless they think, well, Mercedes doesn't have very good matches. Oh, here she is having a great match with Kris Statlander. Let's put them in a rematch and hope we can strike gold twice. And unfortunately, they couldn't. This match definitely did not live up to their original match at Full Gear. This was one of those matches that fell into the category of just being a tick off. And a tick off doesn't seem that bad, but when you're in pro wrestling, things that are a second too slow seem like an hour when you're watching. And most of the things in this match, I would say, were about 5% off, where the moves were just a little too slow and the sequences didn't really have any fluidity to them. Not to the point where they were like sloppy or botched, just to the point where you could see what they were doing before they actually did it. So you could sort of call the spots before they happened. And you could never really get invested in the match as a result, because you could always see the next destination they were going to. It was just a little bit too slow. And that wasn't for one sequence or just the beginning and then they found their groove. That was present throughout the entire match. Just 5% off. But having said that, it was a decent match in terms of the layout and what they did. They had a lot of moves in the match, and I'm a guy who likes to see wrestling when they just hit a lot of moves and when they all look good. The issue is they just didn't always look good. 5%, always 5% off. But having said that, the structure of the match was pretty good. They did a really, really good job in this match about swinging the momentum back and forth a bunch to where Mercedes was on top. So you think, oh, she's definitely winning. Then Statlander gets on top and you go, oh no, Statlander's taking the title, and going back and forth and back and forth and doing it a couple times where you go, okay, this is the end. They're not going to swing the momentum again. And then they do, and they go in the other direction. And it never gets to the point where it is takes you out of your sense of realism or investment. It never really feels like, oh, this match is going too long, or oh, they missed their mark a little bit. It feels like they nailed it perfectly in terms of sequencing and momentum to really get the most out of this match. So a really good match that actually legitimately had me guessing throughout the entire thing. And there were things to like in this match at points. The action at points was really good. My favorite spot in this match is Mercedes hits almost this like pile driver tombstone thing on the apron, and Statlander's on the outside and she's going to get counted out, and Mercedes sort of in the ring laughing, and Statlander slides in at the last second, but she slides in right next to Monet, so they're just sort of having a stare down, and Monet's facials in that moment are absolutely phenomenal. So there is a lot in this match to like. It had the structure of a great match. The execution was just 5% off, 5% of everything. So I can't call it a great match, but it is very, very good. I'm sure if you don't necessarily care about how realistic the moves look and you're just in it for the story that they tell, this would be a great match for you to go watch. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, in our penultimate match, we had the finals of the Continental Classic, Kazuchika Okada retaining his title against Will Ospreay in a really phenomenal match. They did a great job about carrying over the tone set by the previous matches, with Will coming out with a bandage and blood all over his face and looking a little bit haggard from the get-go, and Okada looking fresh, looking confident, and really looking like a world beater in this match. He did a really good job about playing the babyface earlier with Ricochet to now being the heel going against Ospreay. And they did a good job about separating the two, with Ospreay seeming like he went through a war, whereas Okada just sort of went through a normal wrestling match. So he was definitely fresher going into it. And they combine those unique dynamics with interesting character dynamics as well as great action to give you a really great match to end a very good tournament. If you've ever seen an Ospreay versus Okada match before, you know the ingrained dynamic that they have, where Okada is the master. He's the one with more experience, he's a more decorated competitor, and he's the one who brought Ospreay in to New Japan, initiated him into the Chaos faction, and was sort of his mentor there for a long time. So in the early part of this match, when Okada was working over Ospreay, he sort of treated him like a kid or a little bit of an underling in the way he just beat him up and hit him around the ring. But Ospreay, for his part, did a very good job about showing how he has leveled up since coming into New Japan in 2016, and showing that he is actually a competitor on the same level of Okada now. And they did that through some really phenomenal action throughout. Really great stuff throughout, as you would expect from both of these guys. And this was another example of the gripe I had earlier in the Will Ospreay match, where he would sell when it was appropriate to sell, and then when he wanted to get back on offense, he sort of just forgot all of his previous injuries and went back to his normal repertoire of moves. And this being the second time that we saw it on the night, it irked me more than when we saw it earlier. Of now, okay, this is something you are doing consistently, and something I've seen from some of his other matches from earlier in the year, where he's being worked over, he's getting whatever, his neck worked over, hitting a DDT on the floor, getting thrown into the ring steps, and then, oh, time for me to be on offense. Here's a handspring into a twisty kick, just like I could hit in every other match. It doesn't matter if he's 2 minutes or 20 minutes into the match, the move looked exactly the same, and that is really not good, because it removes all believability from the selling of the match. I could never take it seriously when later in the match, after just like a clothesline or a drop kick, Ospreay was selling like he was dead, because all the fabric of believability that had been interwoven into the beginning of the match was sort of torn away a little bit by the lack of consistent selling. That was really the only thing in the match, though, that I could find fault with, because it was really a great match, especially the last 5 minutes. The last 5 minutes were so hot. They got the crowd into it like no other match on the card. No other match I've seen in a while, maybe since like Danielson Strickland at All In. They really did an amazing job pulling the crowd in and getting them invested in the action. And they did that through just these beautiful counters and sequences, and really showing they've wrestled each other a lot. They've had great matches before, and they know each other inside and out. And I would say, especially the last 5 minutes, were a match that are unique to Okada and Ospreay, where no other wrestler on earth could put on as good a final 5 minutes as the guys had. And for me, it really saved the match. It was a great match throughout, but really did hit that crescendo at the end that the matches earlier were missing. So, because once again of that gripe with the selling, it does knock it down from 5 stars. I gave this match 4.75 out of 5 stars. And finally, in our main event for the AEW World title, it was a 4-way match. Jon Moxley defending against Orange Cassidy, Adam Page, and Jay White. And my predominant thoughts on this match are they had a lot of really good ideas with a lot of subpar execution. Like beginning the match with the Death Riders coming in and intervening and have everyone brawling throughout the crowd only for security to take the Death Riders away. Very good idea. But just the timing and the execution and a lot of the offense, it looked sloppy, it looked mistimed. So in practice, it was bad. And the Shield triple powerbomb through the table on Moxley, a fantastic spot. But they didn't properly build to it, so the crowd wasn't as invested in it as if it had happened later in the match, and they didn't really pop like they should have for it. So a really good idea, really poor execution, and that is just the through line of this entire match. And that's sort of a shame, because once they did get into the action and they were going counter for counter for counter with all 4 guys in there, it was really great action. But those sequences, while there were probably 3 or 4 of them, were sort of packaged around this match that just didn't really have any flavor or really personality. It just felt like, okay, now we're moving into the next spot. Now we're moving in. It felt inorganic. It felt pre-planned. It didn't feel like I could actually lose myself in the action like the best multi-man matches could. There were some parts where it got close when the guys were hitting their signature moves, and then one would roll out and another one would come in and hit their moves, and it was back and forth, back and forth. Jay White especially looked fantastic in this match, but those spots were unfortunately few and far between. And I felt like it was cut short a little bit. Like, this match really felt like it was going to go long and have an extra 5 minutes on the end of it, but it almost felt a little bit compacted. Like, they couldn't really get everything they wanted to in there, which is sort of a shame. Once again, like a decent idea for the finish where guys are hitting their finishers, and then Moxley just sort of gets the shock win on Jay White after a Wheeler Yuta Busaiku knee, but poor execution. That is really the through line. So some fun stuff in this match, some action that verged on great, but overall the complete package of the match was just not really that much fun. Didn't really have a unique energy, didn't have anything that would really make it stand out or be memorable. So I gave it 3.75 out of 5 stars. Absolutely could not follow the previous match and was sort of a lackluster way to end the show. And those are my thoughts on AEW World End. What did you guys think? Was the Ospreay versus Fletcher match better than the Ospreay versus Okada match? For my money, I think it was. What did you think of the main event? Did they sort of overshoot the mark a little bit and not really land what they were going for? What was the best match on the card? I would love to know your guys' opinion down in the comments below. I have been Isaiah from Hot Tag Wrestling. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.